Julio, if I don't tell what I've lived through, how will anyone know in the future what this life was like? Because it's not just my life, it's an entire era.
Today, the War Room brings you the fantastic story of Mrs. Alda Niemeyer, a Brazilian woman who inadvertently had encounters with several personalities of the 20th century, especially from World War II. Having spent the entire conflict in Germany after going to the country as a tourist in 1939, now living in Blumenau, Santa Catarina at 102 years old, Mrs. Alda Niemeyer practically survived. She single-handedly saved that city during the terrible floods of 1984 when, as a radio amateur, she coordinated all the civil defense efforts to keep the city supplied. And in 2012, she was honored in Brasilia with the National Civil Defense Medal. But in this interview, you will learn about Mrs. Alda Niemeyer's story during World War II. And I'm sure you'll be surprised.
I was born in Joinville, where my first ancestors arrived in 1848 in the Dona Francisca colony, which was in a neighborhood called Schröder. To this day, two of my great-grandmothers were already born in Joinville. And on the Swiss side, my great-grandfather arrived in Brazil when he was 4 years old. My father passed away when I was 2.5 years old. My sister was 4 weeks old. And my mother went back to her parents' house in Curitiba, where I spent all my childhood and youth until 1939. After my mother saw Grandpa, she went back to my grandparents' house. She met the manager of the German Transatlantic Bank, who was a naturalized Brazilian, German by birth, and was the manager of the German bank. And every 3 years, he had half a year of vacation. And so in 1930, my sister, who was 9 years old, and I, who was 10, went for the first time with my stepfather and my mother to Germany. We spent Christmas there, saw the first snow, had those snowball fights that I hate, when the snow falls right here on your neck. It's bad, it's annoying, but Christmas in Germany was wonderful. In 1930, when I was 10 years old, I only remember, for example, the zoo, the puppet theater we saw in Munich. My father took us to Ida Oberstein. Ida Oberstein is the city where gemstones are cut. We visited museums, we went on a cultural trip. A lot of things were imprinted from that time, but I have the memory of a safe, peaceful time with my stepfather's parents providing a wonderful Christmas, including a banana that they gave us there as a special gift. When we took a bite, we frowned because it didn't taste like banana to us at that time. But I remember peaceful times. We were in Berchtesgaden. We took a boat trip on the Königssee, where there's that fantastic echo on that wall of stones there, of rocks. I really remember a peaceful time. The second trip to Germany I made was in 1936 at the invitation of the German consulate. During the Olympics, they invited athletes who weren't able to participate in the Olympics, but who had a certain athletic level. So I was invited by the consulate, and I also spent 4 weeks in a village in Potsdam, together with other girls from all over the world, from Ireland, Africa, England, France, all of them descendants of Germans. This was a propaganda trip that Germany organized. At that time, I didn't realize it, but later I saw that it was also a means of propaganda. We were in Potsdam, we had lectures, and someone came who sang with us. We got tickets to the Olympics for free, and then we took a bus and went to Königsberg. Imagine what a trip it was for a 16-year-old who, all of a sudden, is in the middle of a world that's pulsing around her. We took that trip. I got to know Germany because of it. And then at the end of the trip, we stopped in Nuremberg to watch the Pataipa. And that's where I took the photograph that I took. Ah, Rudolf Hess. Rudolf Hess, I shook his hand. Actually, he shook my hand. His cousin was married to a pastor in Curitiba, Elizabeth Hess, Elizabeth Frank. And when I said goodbye to them, because we used to live in their house, just like Esther and Ruth lived in our house, Elizabeth, Frau Frank's mother, said, "Oh, Alda, if you happen to meet Rudolf Hess, just kidding, okay? Send him regards from his cousin, Elizabeth." And at the camp I told you about in Munich during that time, in Berlin during the Olympics, we had a visitor, I don't even know where it was, at the Reichstag meeting with Rudolf Hess, who greeted the visitors of the Reich, which was us. I say, Mr. Rudolf Hess. I have a hug for him from his cousin, who is our pastor's cousin, in Curitiba. They put me in the first row, and when she went by one, when he shook my hand, I said to him, "I bring you a hug from your cousin, Elizabeth Hess, married to Pastor Frank in Curitiba." He said, "When you get back home, say hello to her for me. When you get home, give her a hug from me, like I told you, Christian." Nothing was planned, nothing was calculated, nothing was thought out. This just fell into my lap, that's it. In 1936, it was already more. How am I going to explain this to you? It was different. It was more military. It was more like a march. I don't know if it was because we had that strict routine. We had to get up early. We had to do exercises early in the morning. It was also a camp for learning. And everything was already under the swastika cross, okay? You could see the swastika cross. Instead of the Schwarz-Weiß-Rot, the black, white, and red, which I knew as the German flag, you suddenly saw a swastika. It was more military, more rigid. The punctuality of the trains and trams was still the same. It was just like before. But everything was already more aligned. But it was no longer that Baroque, peaceful atmosphere and everything. Everything was already more military, more organized. That's the impression I remember now. I don't know how I'm going to explain it to you here. The difference was noticeable. It was like that. It was remarkable. I watched the game, but I don't remember much about the Olympics anymore. What do I remember about the Olympics? What impressed me the most was the last performance at a Freilichtbühne on an open-air stage. Back then, Paluca danced there, the lady ballerina of Germany, the Firebird, and Benno Haltemeyer, who also danced. It was the first time I saw at the end of the show the spotlights forming a dome. It looked like a church dome. Later, I realized that this was already a weapon of war, because it was the spotlights that searched for 39 and then 40 planes in the sky. This was already a war setup. And I also remember a lecture that someone gave where they talked about the Autobahn. Everyone had to work, and those who didn't have a job or a profession were forced to work on the Autobahn. And I clearly remember the word he said, "We need a means of transportation from north to south, east to west." That was all. Years later, I saw them as preparation for war, but they were just more propaganda flights. I saw the Zeppelin in Curitiba when it came here to Brazil and went up the coast from Paranaguá to Curitiba. I saw the Zeppelin here. During the following years, the Zeppelins were mostly used for propaganda. My father was on the other side of this huge stadium, this huge arena. I had received my invitation along with other girls from the group we traveled with, and I was on one side of the stadium. And he was on the other side because he had to buy his own ticket, and I didn't. I only met him later when I was allowed to leave, because after the show, when Partaitar ended, I met up with him. Actually, he looked for me. He knew where I was. And then we went home. We came home. Then I met up with him. Yeah, we went there as a group, some girls. I don't remember how many, I think 3 or 4. And we stayed in the bleachers right at the top. I mean, they weren't very popular seats, but from there we could see the whole stadium. And at the end of each presentation, there were thousands of soldiers, thousands of athletes, thousands of Arbeitsteams with that shovel on their shoulder, doing maneuvers and marching around. And at the end of all these presentations, Hitler in his car would drive around the whole stadium to finish. And when he started this round here on the side, I started going down the stairs there, the steps of the stadium, and I positioned myself behind the SS Mena, the SS men who were at the security between the audience and the stadium. And one of them murmured to me that they couldn't move much. You can't stay here. I said, I can. I'm not going to do anything. I just want to take a picture. And when the car with Hitler passed by, I first pressed the trigger of that little camera I had, and then I looked. And the result, as I already told you, is this photograph here. My father, because he had the film developed for me, you took a photograph that none of us managed to take, because there were more Brazilians and more people from Curitiba in that bataita. And really, I think that besides this photograph, I haven't seen another one of our friends who were there. At first, I didn't value it much. No, I didn't think I did anything special there. I took a photograph, that's all. And the interests of a 16-year-old girl are quite different. And what does this photograph mean, since it's from a time that was heavy? It was a difficult time. What does a French person feel today when they look at a photograph, a painting, or a reproduction of Napoleon? I didn't think much of that photograph and had forgotten it for years. And they were Hannah Reich and Rolf Hurt with the gliders in Curitiba. And since Curitiba had a rather large colony of German descendants, they often had visits from both theater groups and concert performers. And so I don't know how or in what way Hannah Reich and Rolf Hurt stopped and came to Curitiba. I just know that they assembled their planes at that military airfield that was there. It was small, it wasn't today's airport. At that time, there wasn't commercial aviation yet. But one of their little planes, those small sport aviators, they pulled their planes up and we could watch the maneuvers they did. Obviously, we tried to get as close as possible. And since my stepfather, my father, was part of the sports club, which was right in front of this airfield, we had the chance to be there and see how they took off, the maneuvers they did, and also when they landed. We watched them until they went behind the trees and the houses. That was something, I don't know. I vaguely remember a wave of people who wanted to travel to Germany, mostly young people. I think it was more out of curiosity than anything else, any connection to the country. It was mostly curiosity. So my stepfather arranged for my sister and me a trip from May to October with travels in Germany. Everything was planned. He had everything prepared and scheduled, and we, my sister and I, that for that time was an event that was kind of, how can I say, strange. Nowadays, young people travel all over the world. At that time, 2 young women, 17 and 18 years old, traveling alone without their parents was something really special in society. But we went. And since there was a friend of my father's traveling on the same ship, My father had asked him to look after his daughters a little. And he really took care of us. We used to have breakfast with him at the ship's table. He would ask, "What are you going to do now? We're going to play chef-et-ball. What are you going to do now? We're going to play cards." We decided to keep him busy. We put it on the board there with social events, looking for a bridge group because we knew he liked to play bridge. He actually managed to find bridge partners and stopped controlling us. So we had a really smooth trip. It was a trip that left a mark on me because of an impressive event. One of the sailors on board died, and we went to attend the burial. You can't really say. We were in the middle of the sea. There was no land nearby. He had to be buried one way or another. So he was on top of a board, completely covered with tarps and some weights, as I remember. So we were around that place. Well, it was on a sloped ramp over the deck. The captain talked about Marujo, about his life, about his behavior. The orchestra was playing and we were praying. Everyone prayed the Our Father when slowly this sarcophagus, what do you call it? I don't know. That bondo went down the ramp and into the sea. That really left a mark on me. I thought about it because we had the habit of going to the cemetery every Saturday to bring flowers to my grandparents. So I imagined how that sailor's family would feel since they didn't have that possibility. They only had photographs and could remember him out there at sea, down deep, I don't know, until the Fundura went down. That's it. It left a mark on me, that sailor's burial. In Hamburg, we arrived on May 1st, Labor Day, and my father, my stepfather, I used to call him Dad, had warned a family friend of his. And the eldest son of that family was at the port of Hamburg to receive my sister and me. It was good. It was a nice, calm trip. We said goodbye to our uncle. We used to call him Uncle. He went somewhere else, and we went to those friends' house, and we enjoyed the time. We traveled through Germany, which my father had known, and we also already knew my father's friends from previous trips from 30 and 36. We went on a tour through Germany. Meanwhile, the Second World War started on September 1st, and we were still traveling peacefully through Germany. When we returned to Dortmund, where we had left our suitcase and where we were meeting our family and had a fixed address, there was a letter from the Brazilian consulate saying that anyone who wanted to return to Brazil would have to be in Hamburg on such a day, at such a time, to catch the last ship that was leaving the port of Hamburg for Brazil. We had already missed that date because of our trip, so we didn't even worry about it. That's why we stayed the whole time. In Germany, at first we stayed in Dortmund, and then when my father always wrote, at first we had already arranged through Switzerland, we were going to communicate. He wrote, "Stay where you are, the war will be quick, it's a blitzkrieg, you'll be home by Christmas." But none of that happened, did it? We stayed trapped there. And since he was the manager of the German Transatlantic Bank, which was operating, he had sent Marcos de Uro there. With Marcos de Uro, we could support ourselves. We thought we could travel to Switzerland, where we had distant relatives of my grandfather or my great-grandfather. But they didn't give us permission to leave Germany. They didn't allow us to leave. They didn't give us the exit visa. So we had to manage on our own. We didn't have any winter clothes because our return ticket to Brazil was for October 12th. The ticket was paid for, the cabin was reserved, everything was ready. But we couldn't take that return trip. We had to stay there. And with those gold marks that my father had sent there, we received a small amount every month. So we went from Dortmund to Dresden, thinking that Dortmund, which was an extremely industrial city, coal and minerals with mines there. It was really a city that could be a target. For the Luftkrieg, the air war, we went to Dresden, and there we realized that we had to do something, that we couldn't live like that, just loosely. So with the Goldmark money we received, we managed to get my sister into the Musikhochschule, and I started working at a dental clinic. All that report is on those sheets I gave you today. I took all the nursing courses, both for office and specialized dental clinic, including all oral and facial surgery, and at the same time the Red Cross courses. So I kept myself busy all those years from 40 until 44, 43, the end of 43. I got married, got pregnant right away, and then I asked to be transferred from the clinic to a maternity ward. Classes began starting over. In Germany, nothing is done without professional instructions, vocational courses. Even the girl at the counter who sells silks and fabrics has to take a vocational course. So I took one course after another, first in nursing, then specialized in oral care at the Red Cross. Everything counted, every course, and when I moved to the maternity ward, all the courses started again, which I took. Childcare then, care for women in labor and care for newborns, until my son was born. I think that based on the publicity, I can only talk about what I heard and saw. We couldn't listen to any stations except those from Germany. And I know that the optimistic news was spread that we were going to win. Only the veterans of the First World War, like, for example, my husband's father, he used to say, "This isn't going to work. Napoleon came back defeated. It's not going to work." And there really were already people who had doubts at that time. To be honest, I wasn't worried. For me, it was a matter of survival. One day after another, I didn't think about the future, about the end of the war, how I was going to get through it. I lived day by day and dealt with whatever happened in the present, but I know there were already people who doubted the German victory. But then came the bombing of Dresden in 1945, on February 13th, 1945. I had already taken my son out of the city. Bad Elster, where my sister, after she finished her studies, went to stay with another family who were our friends in Bad Elster. It was a city, a very cozy little town with hot springs. All the sanatoriums there became Red Cross clinics. It was declared an open city by the Red Cross. On all the rooftops of that little town and at every entrance from all sides, there was the Red Cross, the Red Cross. And we thought my sister was safe there. So 3 or 4 weeks before the bombing, I took my son there because we were afraid of the Russian invasion, because the Russians were coming and advancing. The front line was getting closer and closer. So I took my son, who was born in August. He was 6 months old. I took him to her and went to the mayor of that little town and made a statement in front of him. Since we saw the war was ending, we anticipated its conclusion. If after the war she didn't have any news from me but the possibility of returning to Brazil, that she could take my son. This with a stamp, with a swastika. Everything was signed and perfect, but the document disappeared. I don't know where it went. So when I returned to Dresden, I had the bad luck of witnessing the end of the war on the wrong side. Because the bombs that fell, that destroyed this city you're going to see, Cristiano, which is a wonderful city, everything they built was gone. I can show you how broken and destroyed it was. Nothing was left standing. It was a city when I got there that only had windows that looked like blind eyes. Everything has been rebuilt. It's a city that didn't have, it had no war industry or military purpose. And I went back there because of the upbringing I had, out of respect for my mother-in-law, who was alone and had an old age pension. All elderly people, all old people. It was called Dauerheimschutz. I mean, like here in the nursing homes, you can put the elderly there. You could go into this Dauerheim, which had rooms that you rented by the month, by the year. How much did we pay? And she was alone. My father-in-law had passed away. My husband was at the front. So out of conscience and respect for her, even though she was, excuse my language, a viper, she was everything but a mother-in-law, a mother to me. I went back there so I could help. And then I had the bad luck of witnessing the destruction of that city and surviving air raids. The first one, when it came, we went to the basement, and each of the occupants of this house, it had 3 floors, already had their place defined in the basement, where you could put a chair, an armchair, you could bring everything you could save. At the time of an air raid, you would just grab your bag and whatever you needed most and go downstairs. So we went. When the alarm sounded, it was a terrible siren. You knew that planes were going to approach. We ran to the basement, and it was about 15 or 20 minutes. You could hear those booms really close by, and it was horrible. You think your life is over, that you won't survive. Then suddenly everything is quiet again. We left there. Our house was still standing, but without windows and without doors. The pressure from the bombs had ripped everything off, and well, something on the roof caught fire, but they managed to put it out. So we thought our experience with the war was over in that terrible cold, because everything was open with wild wind blowing through. Looking out the window, you saw it was a corner house. So the house on the right side, the house in front, and the one on the left side had holes. And the wooden part on top was in flames. And we were there in our house, and we were calculating, thinking about what we would find the next day, what we wouldn't find the next day. A few hours went by. It was just after 11 at night, about 3 or 4 hours later. The second bombing came. You could hear it. There were no more sirens. The siren was gone, but you could see the bombings coming by, the noise and the bombs falling. We ran to the basement, and our spot was going down to the basement on the stairs on the right side. At the end of the stairs, the right side was already full with other refugees who had taken shelter from the street. So we took shelter on the left side, because at that point any little corner would do. And I just remember that I was in a corner, and suddenly there was a child in my lap about 8 or 9 years old, and the bombs kept coming, coming, coming. It's horrible. Those booms getting closer and closer, we shrink back. I know I grabbed the child, held her head when that boom happened, and we knew it was our house that got hit. Everything was dark. There was no light, nothing, not even the fire we had seen before. Through the holes where we usually threw the coal and everything that had to be kept in the winter, all of that was covered with debris. Well, at that point you wonder, what's going to happen now? You can't breathe because there was dust everywhere and it was all dark. A voice was calling a name, and the child answered. I closed my hand and said, wow, sticking together. I licked blood. Well, it must have hit the child, but it wasn't the child. It was my finger, which was a mess. That happened. I remember that I took off that mess. It had been pierced. My finger, it went through here, and the tip must have just touched the child's head because she was very much alive. When the mother called and she answered, she vanished, and I never saw her again. Then there was another bang, another one, a little explosion, and we learned from civil defense. That helped me later, here in the flood, a lot, where light comes in, air comes in, and we might be able to get out. I don't know who made that little hole, and it was one of those basement leaks. That's why we went from the darkness of dust to the hell of fire. You can't imagine how powerful this fire is. It feels like it pulls you in. But we learned to walk through the fire. That way, like I explained to you last time, the other one hooks in there, does like this, because you can't hold with your hand, but like this. Try this, break it, walk like this. Against water, against fire, against wind, this way you walk safely and in a line. There were 3 of us, and we went through the fire toward the Elbe River. A beam or a piece of wood came. I don't know what it was, and it hit my forehead. You can see there's a slight indentation here. And I was blind for 3 weeks because the heat hit and froze the fluid in my eyes, froze, burned, just like egg whites, okay? The doctor explained to me later, this here was bleeding, but I couldn't see anything anymore. We left our basement without anything, literally without any documents. We had nothing, just the clothes on our backs. I didn't even find my purse. I didn't even remember my purse when I left there. You want to survive. You don't think about anything else. Luckily, when we got to the Elbe River, we went up the Elbe River, started walking. We ended up on the outskirts of the city, and I don't know where we stopped. At a house, we knocked on the door, and my mother-in-law asked for a little water to wash my face, which was bleeding. Then they saw that there was an injury here, and that I was blind. I couldn't see. Light and darkness, yes, but shapes and surroundings, nothing. We were lucky to have knocked on a doctor's house. I clearly remember that someone was holding my head, and I heard the sobs. It was the doctor's wife who was holding my head, sobbing, out of compassion probably, and he was wiping my face. He cut a little bit of my hair here, put on some tape, I don't know what else he put on, and put something over my eye. And they were still kind enough to offer us some coffee. What they called coffee was roasted barley ground up, and we called it makfak. It was coffee at the time, but it was warm, it was tasty. And the doctor's wife even cut a piece of bread into little pieces and fed them to me before we started our walk. So in these weeks, when I was able to walk, being held, I could only hear voices and the snorting of horses beside me. They explained to me that they were the horses from Circus Sarazani, which had, in the middle of the performance, the alarm went off. They didn't have time to change clothes. They grabbed the horses and ran away, and they escaped in the same direction as us. At night, we would spend the night on porches or in stables or basements, wherever we were given shelter, food, whatever we could get. And I remember when I was already more or less able to see, we went into a stable. There were cows. It must have been a farmer with a bunch of cows there. The warmth from the cows, that little bit of heat, it felt nice because it was February and we only had the clothes on our backs. I saw one of the cows licking in the corner. I said, "What is she licking over there in the corner?" I reached in and took it out. A tuber this big. I saw it was a carrot. Wash it? What for? I brushed it off, cleaned it by hand, apologized to the cow, and ate the carrot. It was the best carrot I've ever had. And that's how we went, walking to a city called Bodenbach. There, I recovered myself then. The wound healed here, and my eyesight was almost good. But we didn't have any documents, we didn't have anything. We walked back all those kilometers on foot because there was no train, no bus, nothing, no transportation. Thanks to the organization and efficiency of the Germans, I mean, they were a wretched people, efficient. You just had to see it. At the entrance of every street that led to Dresden, there was a small makeshift office where you could sign up. Then he would ask, your name and the street where you lived. Then he would look at the map and say, well, totally destroyed. And there we received our first document. I have all of that. I can show it to you. Total loss, complete damage. At Elisentrasse 9, and the family where we were staying happened to have a machine, a camera with a film inside, an old film. They thought it wouldn't work anymore, but we took it just in case, and we took some pictures. I have these photographs of Elisentrasse 9, of what was left of our house from the wreckage. And we came back with that little piece of paper that identified us as total Schaden. I mean, proving that we really had nothing left, just the clothes on our backs. Another walk towards Bad Elster, where my son and my sister were. There was already in Czechoslovakia a part of a train line that got close to Bad Elster in Bad Brambach, and we took that train. It was like sardines in a can. We were stacked. There were people sitting on the benches, and between the benches in the aisles, we were crowded together. And I remember there was a lady in the corner sleeping, a young lady sleeping on her side, a middle-aged lady with a baby on her body. And I was thinking about my baby that I was going to see. I wanted to see, and I reached out. She took my hand away and said, "Don't touch." I said, "Why not? My grandson was born the day before yesterday. He just passed away. And if someone on the train notices that he's dead, I have to throw him out the window. I don't want to. We want to get to that city where she had relatives." The mother didn't know that the baby was already dead. She was sleeping from exhaustion. Where they stayed, I don't know. They got off. They left the train in another city. We got off at Bad Bramba and kept walking into the night. At midnight, we arrived in Bad Elster. We knocked on the window at my sister's room. I saw my son again, and I was pregnant with my second child. I found that out right there. That's my story of the bombing. I have the impression that every German was afraid of the Russian invasion. I heard from friends that one of our friends was assaulted by 16 Russians and died right there on the spot. It was one after another, and this was told to me by a friend who was there, who also suffered too, just not as much as this one. She was very beautiful. She was gorgeous, red hair, beautiful personality. Then came the Russian occupation, and the Americans got close when the Russians gathered the foreigners. They took us out of the private homes to organize the transportation. They took us from our friend's house, brought us to a neighboring city, and gave us a camp. They left us in a factory, in an office, which was just that, just a cubicle. And the Russian spoke a little German and explained to me that I should leave my sister right in the corner and me in the front, because the Russians respected pregnant women a lot. And we had a baby with us there. So he came 3 times a day, and he would say, "Komm, Frau, wes Wasser?" He took my hand, led me to a kind of improvised kitchen, and gave me milk, a mug of milk and bread. This happened 3 times a day. He respected us as well. There was nothing in that office except a layer of hay on the floor, but it was just 2 nights, 2 or 3 nights that we stayed there. Then they put us on that train, and we went to Hof to be exchanged for Russians. We had to report ourselves. At the city hall, I got her passport and mine. She was by my side, and I held them. When 2 or 3 people came out of the city hall, foreigners, they could come in, 2 or 3. But in front of the city hall gate, there was a Russian with a carbine, and suddenly that carbine was pointed at my stomach. If he pulls the trigger now, since I'd read many detective stories, I knew he closes his eyes when firing. I said, "Let's not look him in the eyes." I looked into the Russian's eyes, and he had the rifle right here on my stomach, very visible. He stood up. When two people left, my sister and I went in. We introduced ourselves to the Russian commander. He took the passport, looked at the side, tilted his head up. I said, "Excuse me," and I turned the passport, and then he saw the photograph. And I said, "Amerikansky." He didn't speak English. I said, "Amerikansky." I knew that was Russian, that he would understand. Then he gave us a kind of safe conduct pass, and a week later we were called to be deported to the American occupation zone. We went, put on a train. I don't know which of you has seen the movie Dr. Zhivago, those crowded scenes. It was a freight car, no seats, nothing at all, with two doors on each side, where there was a Russian with a carbine. Because we went through Nieman's land, through no man's land. It's 3 kilometers between each occupation, every American occupation by the Russians. In Hof, in the city of Hof, we were exchanged 1, 2, 3 from the Russian side for 2, 3 Ukrainians who were refugees in Germany or who were from the Vlasov regiment who fought on the German side. So it was my sister, my son, and I, the three of us who were exchanged. He was in his stroller, in the baby carriage, with our belongings underneath, the baby on top, and us with the bags we could carry. We arrived in the Russian-occupied zone. The Deutsches Museum was completely empty. There was nothing left of those exhibition objects. It was empty. And it was the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization headquarters, where all foreigners and occupation soldiers from the Allied friends had free access. And there we were enlisted, and there was an American soldier who gave each one who went, foreigner who was admitted, a strip of corrugated cardboard. When he saw my belly, which was already quite big, he folded the cardboard and gave me 2 layers of that cardboard. He took a knife, cut from top to bottom, making that my bed. My God, guys, how hard it was. That floor on top of you with your belly so big you don't even know which side to turn to anymore. But it passed. And 2 or 3 days later, we were taken to the von Kaesene. We stayed there, and that's where we were born by my second child. I had separated from my husband, from my first husband, in 46, already at the camp, already at the Air Force barracks. And he couldn't enter the camp because he was German, but a friend of ours took the boys to the gate right at the entrance, and one day he came back, only with the baby in the car, crying that my husband and mother-in-law had taken my baby, who was about a year and a half, 2 years old. 2 years old, he could already talk, and that they disappeared with him. They waited for a streetcar to pass, took the child, got on the streetcar, and disappeared. And since my sister worked in the office of this foreigner camp, speaking fluent English, she informed the Americans and they mobilized the entire police force. All the railway stations, all the bus stations, all the exits from Munich, every car that left was checked. And at night, really, this was kind of like day at night. They caught them with tickets at the train station to the Russian occupation zone. Because the trains were running, they caught them with the boy and brought the boy back to me at midnight in a jeep. 3 of them, about Julio's size, in uniform with everything required, full costume with decorations and all. And my son, blonde, cute, mommy, candies, candies, candies. To keep him quiet, they gave him plenty of chocolate, cookies, and candy. And he was so happy, and he had never seen lights at night because we were at the camp. They passed to Munich, all lit up, daughter, and Lichter, many lights and candies. They brought the boy back to me. This was until 1947. In 1947, the Brazilian Repatriation Organization gathered the Brazilians. We went by train to Hamburg. We boarded the Santarem, which was a 6,000-ton ship, a nutshell, all rusty. It was the ship Frankberg, which was given after the First World War as a reprisal to Brazil. It served as a cargo ship on the Brazilian coast. They removed all the cargo, put in bunk beds, and repatriated Brazilians from Germany in 5 or 6 trips. And with the first one, because we had valid passports, always renewed by the Portuguese consulate, we were the first ones who came, my 2 children and I. My sister had already come before, but that's another story, February 1st. In 1947, I landed in Rio de Janeiro with the Santarém, Julio. If I don't tell what I lived through, how will anyone know how it was in the future? This life, because it's not just my life. It's an entire era. It was a difficult time. It was a difficult time for everyone, for many people. My life, my destiny, my place. It's minimal, thinner than a hair in all that happened. But it happened to me. It shaped me. It shaped me as a person because I went there as an 18-year-old girl, spoiled, cared for God's sake. Don't do anything. And I came back with a lot of experience, a really good amount of experience. I don't want to give up anything, nothing, not a single day of my life. The only thing I wish I hadn't experienced was the bombing of Dresden and the death of my 2 sons. The rest of my life, I think, was a life well lived, a life full, a rich life, a happy life.
Did you like the story? If you like our work and want to support the channel, you can do that by sending us pics or by contributing on Apoia-se. That way, you join our very important person WhatsApp group and discuss the next topics with me. I want to thank everyone who's helping, but especially these buddies here who are top-notch. And if you're curious and want to buy the books I use to make these videos, I'll leave the links for them right down here. For now, watch these videos I picked out for you, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you don't miss any notifications. When I post more videos, I'll be signing off for now, and I thank you again for watching. A big hug from the War Room.